Everyone in that courtroom had already decided how the story ended. Claire Hartwell sat alone at the small defendant's table near the back wall, hands folded in her lap, expression unreadable. She wore a plain charcoal blazer she'd owned since before the marriage. No jewelry, no designer anything, no attorney beside her. Just a woman who looked to every person in that room like someone who had already accepted defeat. Across the aisle, Derek Hartwell leaned back in his chair like a man relaxing after a long flight. Dark suit, custom boots, a Tag Heuer watch that caught the fluorescent light every time he shifted his wrist, which he did often because he knew people were watching. He smiled without hiding it. This was supposed to be easy. His legal team had done this exact thing dozens of times before. The judge glanced at Claire's file, then at the row of attorneys flanking Derek's side of the room. So the respondent accepts the divorce settlement, no claim to shared assets, no spousal support, no right of further appeal. "Yes, Your Honor," Claire said. Her voice was quiet and steady. A murmur moved through the gallery. Derek's mouth twitched at the corner. Jade Mercer, seated just behind him, leaned forward and whispered, "I told you she'd fold." Claire didn't look at either of them. She picked up the pen and signed the final page without a pause. No shaking, no hesitation, no tears. 6 years of marriage ended in under 10 minutes. As the clerk collected the documents, Derek exhaled. No property dispute, no business exposure, no spectacle. Naomi Claire was walking away with nothing, exactly as he'd planned. Then the bailiff pushed through the side door, looking confused. "Your Honor, we need to pause proceedings." The judge frowned. "For what reason?" The bailiff hesitated, scanning a note in his hand. There's a private aircraft that just cleared the restricted airspace over the plaza. It's registered under court-connected business. Air traffic flagged it. Laughter scattered through the gallery. Someone scoffed. One of Derek's attorneys smiled at the ceiling. Derek smirked. Whatever this was, it had nothing to do with him. Claire stood. For the first time since she'd entered the room, she lifted her chin. Her voice, when she spoke, carried all the way to the back row without effort. "That would be mine." The room went still. Derek turned. His smile didn't disappear, it just stopped making sense on his face. Every pair of eyes in the courtroom shifted to the woman he had spent the last 18 months convincing the world to forget. He had no idea in that moment that this was the beginning of everything collapsing. Before the courtroom, before the whispers, before any of it, Claire Hartwell lived a life that nobody paid much attention to. Every morning she walked 4 blocks to the Ridgeline Community Center, unlocking the side entrance before the Austin sun had fully cleared the rooftops. Her job was modest. Organize the archive room. Help elderly patrons navigate the digital catalog. Set up the reading corner for the Tuesday after-school program. Nobody there knew she had once drafted binding arbitration clauses in a glass tower on 6th Street, or that she had spent 3 years as an associate at one of Austin's top litigation firms before she quietly stepped back. They only saw a woman who smiled politely, asked good questions, and never talked about herself. Claire lived in a rented 1-bedroom apartment above a taqueria on South Congress. The walls were thin, and the window AC rattled all summer. She'd furnished the place from Facebook Marketplace and a single weekend at a garage sale. Her phone was 2 generations behind a crack running diagonally across the lower corner she'd never bothered to fix. Not because she couldn't, because she didn't need to. What hurt wasn't the money. It was how effortlessly people believed she had earned her fall. Derek had moved carefully in the months before the divorce, quiet conversations at charity auctions, an offhand comment at a client dinner, a well-placed sigh at the right moment. By the time the papers were filed, the story had already been told. Claire had struggled to keep up. Claire had no real drive of her own. Claire had chosen a small life and couldn't handle what came with ambition. Nobody said it directly. They never had to. After the separation, the social calendar went silent. Invitations stopped. His family didn't return her messages. At Lily's school events, other parents found reasons to look past her once they placed the name. She was the woman who had lost everything. The wife, who walked away with nothing, Claire, never corrected them. At night, after Lily fell asleep, Claire sat at the kitchen table with a cup of reheated coffee and her worn leather-filled notebook open beside her. Inside dates, photocopied contracts, email threads printed at the library before she returned the borrowed printer access code. Timelines. Signatures. Pieces of a world she had never fully left behind. The exhaustion that found her in those hours wasn't the kind that sleep fixed. It was the kind that came from swallowing words you were never given permission to say, from watching someone else step into the space you once occupied and call it an upgrade while you stayed quiet. But Claire didn't break. She folded Lily's school clothes with care. She showed up to every parent conference. She read bedtime stories with steady hands. If Lily sensed the weight her mother was carrying, she never said it directly. She just reached for Claire's hand a little more often on the walk home. People mistook her calm for weakness. They mistook silence for surrender. What they didn't understand was that Claire wasn't waiting for revenge. She was waiting for timing. Because the truth exposed too early gets buried under denial and money and spin. But the truth revealed at exactly the right moment, it doesn't just survive. It reshapes everything built on top of the lie. And somewhere across Austin, in a glass-walled office above the river, a man who believed he'd won was still smiling, completely unaware that the woman he had dismissed was quietly preparing the ground beneath his feet to give way. Derek Hartwell understood something most people spent their whole lives missing. Perception didn't follow reality, it preceded it. Whoever told the story first controlled what people believed. In the weeks leading up to the divorce, he told the story first. Careful conversations at rooftop dinners. A worried tone dropped into fundraiser small talk. Concern expressed quietly with regret in the right ears. He never said anything specific. He didn't have to. By the time the papers were filed, the consensus had already formed. Claire was a woman who couldn't keep up. Gifted maybe in her own quiet way, but not built for the life Derek had built. Jade Mercer handled the rest. She was good at her job. Brand, strategy, reputation, management, message architecture, she called it, that architecture, like it was a form of art. She knew which journalists asked soft questions. She knew which angles made Derek look like a man moving forward thoughtfully rather than a man burning down what he no longer needed. She smoothed the timeline. She redirected uncomfortable questions. She made the narrative clean. At social events, Jade stood beside Derek like she had always belonged there. She touched his arm at the right moments, laughed easily. People commented on how alive he seemed. They congratulated him without quite knowing what they were congratulating him for. Derek never corrected them. In private, he felt something close to joy. The house was his. The company was untouched. The story was settled. Claire had signed everything without a fight. He told himself she had chosen simplicity. He had chosen forward motion. He didn't see cruelty in what he'd done, only efficiency. When colleagues asked how Claire was holding up, Derek sighed with just the right weight. She wanted something quieter, he'd say. I think she's genuinely happier without all the pressure. Jade told him he'd handled the whole thing with grace. Not many men could walk away from that cleanly, she said. The word grace settled comfortably in Derek's chest. What neither of them understood was that control only functions when the other person is still playing the same game. Derek believed Claire's silence confirmed his version of events. He believed her absence was surrender. He believed the story was closed because he'd been the last one speaking. But stories don't end when one voice stops. They end when the truth finally enters the room. And while Derek moved through a world that largely believed him, Claire was doing something far more dangerous than arguing. She was letting him grow comfortable inside a fiction that had already begun to rot from within. The first real crack came on a quiet Wednesday night, long after Lily had drifted off. Claire was sitting at the kitchen table, the taqueria downstairs, finally silent, when her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar notification. She ignored it at first. Automated messages from creditors and financial institutions had become background noise, but this one kept reappearing. Urgent signature verification required. Action needed within 72 hours. Her chest tightened. She opened it. The email was from a commercial lending institution she didn't recognize. A $4.2 million development financing agreement, a mixed-use project she vaguely remembered Derek mentioning in passing, something about a stretch of land near the domain. What froze her wasn't the amount. It was the name at the bottom of the document. Hers. Her legal name. Her signature. Claire stood so quickly her chair scraped against the tile. She crossed to the cabinet above the refrigerator, pulled down a stack of cookbooks, and removed the manila envelope tucked behind them. Original contracts, copies, old correspondence she'd kept out of instinct more than strategy. She found the document in under 3 minutes. It was real. And it was worse than she'd first understood. Derek had used her name as a financial guarantor, without telling her, without her knowledge, without her informed consent. The timing was deliberate. The agreement had been executed during their marriage, during a period when trust had made questions feel unnecessary, even insulting. If the project faltered, if it defaulted, the liability wouldn't land on Derek's company. It would land on her. For the first time in months, something cold moved through Claire's control. Not panic, something sharper. Clarity that came with edges. This wasn't an oversight. This was architecture. Derek hadn't just tried to leave her with nothing. He had tried to leave her holding a debt she never agreed to carry. She sat back down, staring at the signature that looked like hers, understanding precisely how it had been obtained. Papers slid across a kitchen counter on an ordinary Sunday afternoon. Just routine, Derek had said already, moving toward the door. I'll walk you through it later. Later never came. Claire closed her eyes. She forced herself to breathe slowly, deliberately. If she called him now, if she confronted him, accused him, sent the document to anyone without a plan, it would disappear. He would deny it. His lawyers would bury it. The story would be rewritten for the 3rd time, and this time she wouldn't get another turn. She picked up her phone. She navigated to a contact she hadn't spoken to in nearly 4 years, a name she'd saved under only a first name and a single initial. She forwarded the email with one sentence. I need to understand what this actually means. She set the phone down and looked out the window at the dark city below. Because Claire Hartwell was no longer just facing the end of a marriage. She was standing at the edge of a trap, and she was just beginning to understand its dimensions. The next morning moved like any other. She walked Lily to school, their hands loose together as they waited for the crosswalk signal. The city went about its business, around them delivery trucks, joggers, a man arguing with his earbuds on the corner. The ordinary world indifferent to the quiet disasters inside it. Lily swung her backpack and hummed something without a name. She didn't know about documents or guarantors or the specific shape of betrayal. It wasn't until that evening dinner cleared dishes, drying the apartment, holding its soft after-dinner quiet, that she asked. They were on the couch together, a lamp on low, Lily curled against Claire's side with a library book open across her knees. Claire's mind kept drifting. The email, the signature, the name at the bottom of a contract she hadn't signed. Mom. Yeah, baby. Lily didn't look up from the book. Her voice was careful, the way children's voices get when they've been turning a question over for a while. Did Daddy know you would be sad when he left? Claire felt her breath catch somewhere in her chest. She turned, slightly studying her daughter's face, the serious brow, the honest eyes. Children don't ask questions to wound. They ask to understand. I think Daddy was focused on what he wanted, Claire said slowly. And he didn't spend much time thinking about how other people might feel. Lily nodded, absorbing that. Then quietly, the way the most important things always arrive. Then why did you stop talking when he hurt you? The room went very still. Claire swallowed. Children sense silence the way adults notice noise. They feel absence. They catalog the things adults don't say. Lily had been watching, and what she had seen wasn't weakness. She had simply been trying to make sense of it. I didn't stop because I was weak, Claire said gently. Sometimes you have to listen for a long time before you know exactly what to say. Lily frowned, thinking, but if you don't say anything, how does anyone know the truth? Claire felt the tears come before she could decide whether to let them. Not grief. Something else. Something that had been waiting for exactly this moment. That was it. Not the forged signature. Not the $4.2 million liability. Not the courtroom that was coming. It was this, her daughter's 7-year-old logic, precise and unsparing. She pulled Lily close and held on. "I promise you," she said into her daughter's hair, "you will see me speak when the time is right." Lily settled back, satisfied, and turned the page. But Claire didn't move. She sat in the soft lamplight and understood something she hadn't fully articulated until now. This fight had never just been about what Derek had done to her. It was about what she was going to allow her daughter to believe love and power were supposed to look like. She waited 3 days before making the call. Not from uncertainty, from discipline. Panic scattered pieces. She needed them arranged. On the third night, she drove to the community center after closing, let herself in through the side entrance, and sat at the archive desk in the dark. Her MacBook opened the city quiet outside the tall windows. She opened her contacts. Marcus Alvarez answered on the second ring. There was a pause when she said her name. Then I was starting to wonder. Marcus wasn't just any attorney. Years before, Claire had stepped away from her career before Derek, before Lily, before the careful dismantling of everything she'd built. Marcus had been her mentor at the firm. He was the one who taught her to read between the clauses, that contracts don't just define agreements. They reveal the assumptions of the person who drafted them. He specialized now in financial litigation, the quiet collapses, the ones that began in boardrooms and ended in federal filings. She didn't explain everything. She didn't need to. "I believe my name was used as leverage on a financing agreement," she said, "and I believe it was deliberate." She sent him the document without comment. 10 minutes passed. Then Marcus exhaled slowly, the way he did when something was worse than expected. "This isn't careless," he said. "This is intentional, and it tells me more about your ex-husband than he ever meant to show." Claire closed her eyes. She had known. But confirmation carried its own weight. "If this project defaults," Marcus continued, "he walks away bruised. You don't walk away. You absorb the fall. Can it be undone?" He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was precise. "It can be exposed. And if we move correctly, it won't just protect you, it will trap him inside his own decisions." That word, trap. Marcus laid it out slowly. The marital timing, the consent loopholes in Texas law, the specific language Derek had insisted on, language designed to create the appearance of transparency while ensuring she would never have cause to question it until it was too late. Every layer had been thought through. Every assumption had been made about her silence. "Here's what matters," Marcus said. "You don't move yet. You let him believe this is over." Claire looked around the dark archive room, rows of books, patient and full of truths that had been waiting years to be found. "I can do that," she said. After the call ended, she sat for a long time without moving. She wasn't afraid anymore. She understood the shape of what was coming. And for the first time since the divorce papers were signed, she felt something shift, not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. The way tectonic plates shift in the dark, the power had moved. Nobody else in the world knew it yet. The settlement agreement had been drafted to look simple. That was the genius of it. Claire read it again late that night, the pages spread across the kitchen table, Lily asleep in the next room, the taqueria downstairs finally still. On the surface, it was everything Derek wanted the world to see. Clean language, reasonable terms. A woman releasing claims, property, and future recourse without resistance. A woman choosing to walk away, but Marcus had taught her long ago that the most dangerous clauses were never the obvious ones. They were buried, tucked into definitions, nested inside procedural language, made to look like standard boilerplate. The agreement didn't just dissolve a marriage. It established a timeline. It confirmed when specific decisions had been made, and it anchored acknowledgement of those decisions to specific parties. Claire traced the language slowly, her finger following phrases that had once seemed unremarkable. Independent financial review acknowledged. Full disclosure confirmed by both parties. Assumption of separate liability effective upon execution. Derek had pushed hard for that language. She remembered the afternoon, a Sunday, the kitchen papers fanned across the counter. "It's just standard," he'd said, already impatient, sliding the stack toward her. "It protects both of us." It didn't protect both of them. It protected him, but only if she disappeared, because by signing the agreement cleanly without contest, she hadn't surrendered power. She had locked him into his own stated version of events. Every clause was now proof of what he had claimed and what he had denied. The loan, the guarantor, the timing of decisions he insisted were transparent. All of it was on record, and all of it could be challenged. At the worst possible moment for him, Naomi folded the papers and slid them back into their envelope. She didn't feel anger. She felt clarity, the steady, cold kind that made decisions easy. The following morning, Derek sent a text. "Everything's resolved. Hope you find what you're looking for." Claire read it once, locked her phone. Didn't reply, because what Derek didn't understand was the agreement he believed had ended the story was actually its final chapter. He had signed it, filed it, and celebrated it without realizing it was a record, a precise court-documented record of arrogance and assumption, and a man who believed that silence meant ignorance. She stood at the window of her apartment watching South Congress come alive below the city, indifferent and vast. The trap wasn't closing yet, but it was already built, and when Derek finally understood what he had walked into, there would be no exit worth taking. That same evening, Derek celebrated the way he always celebrated, loudly in the right venue in front of the right people. Tanner's sat on the top floor of a renovated building on Congress Avenue, its glass walls framing the Austin skyline in bands of copper and steel, the kind of place where the menu had no prices and the staff made you feel like an interruption. Derek loved it. It made him feel the way he liked to feel, untouchable. Jade sat across from him, dressed to be noticed, her confidence lit from within like something polished specifically for this occasion. She lifted her glass first. "To clean endings," she said, "and better beginnings." Derek smiled and clinked his glass to hers, to finally moving forward. The world felt simple again. No tense emails, no uncomfortable questions, no lawyer calls at 7 a.m. The divorce papers were signed. Claire had vanished exactly as predicted. The noise, the inconvenience, was gone. That was the story Derek told himself over the sea bass and the second bottle of wine. He talked about expanding the company, a commercial development near the domain he'd been circling for 2 years, a resort concept near Lake Travis with partners who had real capital. He talked freely, loosely, the way men talk when they believe consequences belong to someone else. Jade listened closely, nodding at the right moments. She was already imagining herself in the spaces Claire once occupied. The house, the social calendar, the dinner table. She had won. She was certain of it. When Derek stepped away to take a call, Jade watched him cross the room and felt the clean satisfaction of a plan completed. Claire Hartwell was a closed chapter, a cautionary tale at best. Derek returned, slipping his phone away, chin up. "Everything's aligning," he said. "I'm exactly where I need to be." He believed that. What he didn't notice, what neither of them noticed, was the small disturbances beginning to collect at the edges. An email that had gone unanswered longer than usual. A calendar confirmation that hadn't come. A name missing from a meeting invitation he'd expected to receive. Nothing alarming, nothing worth pausing over. But Jade leaned closer and said, "You handled this perfectly. Most men would have lost their nerve." Derek laughed. "Control is just preparation," he said. Claire never prepared. The words settled comfortably between them. They had no idea that control, when built entirely on assumptions about another person's silence, has exactly one weakness. It fails the moment reality stops cooperating. And as Derek raised his glass to the Austin skyline, convinced the story was his, Claire Hartwell was 3 miles away, doing the most dangerous thing of all. She was letting him celebrate too early. The courthouse was busy the morning. Everything changed. Attorneys moved through security with practiced confidence, coffee in hand, briefcases swinging. Derek arrived early, flanked by 2 attorneys from the firm he'd been using since his company first crossed 8 figures. He looked like what he was, a man in familiar territory. Jade walked beside him, heels quiet on the marble. She didn't need to be there legally. She wanted to watch. Claire was nowhere in sight. Derek noticed immediately, though he pretended otherwise. He glanced toward the respondents' benches once, then again. Empty. Running late? Jade asked lightly. Or, she changed her mind, Derek said. Wouldn't be the first time, but something tightened at the edge of his jaw. Claire wasn't impulsive. She wasn't emotional in public. If she was absent, it was a choice. The judge entered. The room settled. Names were called. Derek's attorneys stood polished and ready. Then the judge paused. "Where is Miss Hartwell?" One of Derek's attorneys cleared his throat. "Your Honor, we haven't been notified of any delay. The agreement has been signed and entered. We'll wait 10 minutes, the judge said. 10 minutes passed the way they do when something is wrong, slowly, with the wrong kind of attention. Whispers started. Glances moved toward Derek. Jade crossed her legs and uncrossed them. At the 15-minute mark, the judge frowned. If the respondent fails to appear, the courtroom doors held. Derek leaned toward his lawyer. "What is this? We don't know," came the quiet reply. "But it shouldn't affect the filing." It shouldn't, but shouldn't was doing a lot of work. At 20 minutes, a clerk approached the bench with a folded note. The judge read it, eyebrows lifting by a fraction. He set it down carefully. "Court will remain in recess," he said, "due to an external matter directly connected to this proceeding." Derek's head came up. "What external matter?" The judge looked at him steadily. "You'll be informed shortly." And for the first time that morning, the first time in a long time, Derek felt something move through him that he didn't have a name for. Not fear, not yet. Uncertainty. The specific kind that arrives when a plan stops responding. Beyond the courthouse walls, something was approaching. And Claire Hartwell wasn't missing. She was simply arriving on her own terms. At first, Derek thought it was road construction. A low, controlled rumble moved through the courthouse walls, vibrating faintly beneath the polished floors, building too steadily to be random. Conversations paused. Heads turned instinctively toward the upper corridor windows. The sound grew. Not chaotic. Deliberate. Moving with the specific authority of something that doesn't ask permission. A bailiff stepped quickly into the chamber, leaning to whisper to the clerk. The clerk rose immediately and moved to the judge. Papers were set aside. The room shifted from procedural to alert in the space of 15 seconds. Derek felt it then, a tightening low in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. "What is that?" Jade said, her voice edging toward sharp. Outside, beyond the courthouse plaza, a private jet completed its approach and settled cleanly onto the tarmac of the adjacent airfield. Sleek. Quiet. The engines winding down with the unhurried confidence of something that had arrived exactly when it intended to. Phones emerged throughout the gallery. People pressed toward the windows. Even the attorneys paused. Private jets didn't land for divorce proceedings. They landed for people who moved capital. Derek stood slowly. His confidence didn't shatter all at once. It cracked, a single clean line running through it. He watched his own certainty fracture and couldn't stop it. The clerk returned to the bench. "Your Honor, the incoming party has confirmed identity and its relevance to this case." Derek turned. "What party?" The judge looked at him without expression. "The respondent." The word hit like a physical thing. Jade's face went pale. "That's not, she doesn't have." She stopped. The courtroom doors opened. Not dramatically, not hurried. Just enough. Claire Hartwell stepped inside. She wore a fitted charcoal coat, understated, precise. Her posture was calm, her expression unreadable. No visible jewelry. No performance. Behind her, 2 men entered who did not belong in this room by accident. One carried a slim leather portfolio, the other scanned the space with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been in rooms like this before and had never been surprised by what he found. The murmurs erupted. Derek stared, unable to arrange his thoughts into order. Because this wasn't luck. This wasn't coincidence. This was the result of time and patience, and someone who had been preparing long after he assumed she'd stopped. Claire met his eyes for exactly 1 second. Not with anger, with certainty, and in that second, Derek understood something he should have understood long ago. The sound he'd heard wasn't just an arrival. It was a warning that had been in motion for months. The courtroom didn't breathe. Claire walked to the respondent's table and sat, calmly, without ceremony. The judge cleared his throat. "Miss Hartwell, we were informed of a delay." "Yes, Your Honor," Claire said. Her voice filled the room without effort. "I wanted to arrive properly prepared." Prepared. The word moved through the gallery like a current. Jade leaned toward Derek, her whisper sharp. "Who are those men?" Derek didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on Claire, searching for the cracks he was used to finding. There were none. Claire opened her leather-filled notebook, the worn one, the one Derek used to call that journal thing, and placed it on the table. She aligned it with quiet precision. Didn't rush. Didn't perform. "I accepted the settlement," she said. Her tone was measured clear. "At the time, I believed it reflected the full truth of our shared finances." The judge nodded. And now, Claire said, lifting her eyes, "I understand it reflects only one version of events. The version my ex-husband arranged for it to reflect." The murmur in the gallery shifted register from curious to calculating. Derek's attorney was on his feet. "Your Honor, the agreement has been signed and filed." "The respondent, I'm aware," Claire said, not cutting him off, just continuing. She didn't raise her voice. She simply didn't stop. "That's why I'm here, to clarify what the agreement actually confirms." She slid the notebook forward. Behind it, a slim folder of documents organized by date tabbed clean. The court clerk accepted them and carried them to the bench. Derek's throat closed, because in this moment it became unmistakably clear Claire hadn't come to argue. She hadn't come to beg or negotiate or create drama. She had come with documentation. She had come to let a record speak, a record of who made which decisions when, under what conditions, and what they expected the silence to cover. She folded her hands on the table. "I'm ready to proceed," she said, and for the first time since this process had begun in any of its forms, the room understood that this was no longer Derek Hartwell's story being told. It was hers. The judge's eyes moved past Claire and settled on the man seated quietly behind her. He hadn't spoken since entering. He hadn't introduced himself, but his presence had altered the density of the room from the moment he arrived. "Before we proceed," the judge said carefully, "the court needs to know who was present with the respondent." The man stood. "Owen Press," he said. "I'm here in an advisory capacity. Simple. Even. That was all." But the name moved through the room like something dropped into still water. Derek recognized it instantly. Anyone operating in Austin's real estate and development world recognized it. Owen Press didn't run a flashy firm. He didn't give interviews. But his investment vehicle had quietly backed and quietly unwound more than a few projects that had tried to grow faster than their foundations could support. Derek had pitched to Owen's associates once 2 years ago. He hadn't made it past the preliminary meeting. Jade's breath stopped audibly. Why is he here for her? Owen stepped forward. "Miss Hartwell requested my presence due to overlapping financial exposure." He paused. "She is a silent partner in an investment structure that directly intersects with assets referenced in this divorce agreement. Her absence from prior discussions was a strategic decision, not an oversight." Derek's lead attorney rose. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular, as was the undisclosed use of her name as a financial guarantor," Owen replied. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The words simply landed and stayed. Silence. Derek stared at Claire. His mind was moving backward fast, uncontrolled through every paper he'd slid across a counter. Every assumption he'd made about what she understood and what she didn't. Every calculation built on the certainty that she would stay quiet because she always had. Claire met his gaze. "I didn't disappear," she said softly. "I stepped back. There's a difference." Owen sat down. The damage was done not through force but through precision. And as Derek searched the room for something to hold on to, he found the worst thing possible. Claire hadn't needed saving. She had arrived with someone who chose to stand beside her, not out of charity, not out of pity, but because she was someone worth backing. The judge leaned forward. "Let the documentation be entered into the official record." Claire slid the folder across the table with a steady hand, stopping it at the exact edge. "Not performance. Procedure." Derek's attorney took it, flipping too quickly at first, then slowing. His expression changed. Timelines, email chains, bank confirmations, contract copies with specific clauses highlighted, the guarantor agreement. The signature, the marital dates on either side of it like parentheses around a crime. Your Honor, the attorney said carefully, these documents appear to reference transactions outside the scope of this divorce proceeding. Claire responded before the judge could. They're within scope because the settlement agreement explicitly confirms when these financial decisions were made and by whom. That makes them directly relevant to whether the settlement reflects full and accurate disclosure. The judge nodded. Proceed. And Claire did. Page by page, calmly, without editorial. She didn't editorialize. She didn't dramatize. She simply narrated a sequence of events in the order they occurred: the loan, the signature, the timing, the specific language. Derek had insisted on the assumptions behind that language. The assumptions about her silence. Derek felt the room shifting. The murmurs weren't curious anymore. They were calculating. Heads were tilting. Eyes were moving between the documents and Derek's face. Jade sat frozen. This wasn't the narrative she had curated. This wasn't damage control. This was the thing that happened after damage control failed. Miss Hartwell, the judge asked, why weren't these concerns raised at the time of the original filing? Because raising them without documentation would have made them disappear, Claire said. She met the judge's eyes directly. I needed the record to confirm what had already been claimed. The agreement itself does that. Derek's attorney straightened. Your Honor, my client maintains there was no intent to mislead. Claire looked at the attorney not unkindly, just firmly. Intent, she said, is established by preparation. The silence that followed was the kind that stays. The judge leaned back. The court will need to reassess the validity of the existing settlement in light of what's been presented today. Derek's jaw tightened. His stomach dropped. Because this was no longer a matter of persuasion, no longer a question of whose story the room believed. The truth was on the record now. And once truth enters the official record, it doesn't leave quietly. It stays. It multiplies. It reshapes everything that was built on top of the lie it replaced. The first visible fracture came from Jade. She had built her entire professional identity on control, on deciding what the world was allowed to see and when and how. As the judge continued reviewing the documents, her posture stiffened. Her fingers tightened around her phone like it might ground her to the version of reality she'd spent months maintaining. Derek's attorney called for a brief recess. The judge allowed it. Chairs shifted, murmurs burst and faded. Jade turned to Derek immediately, voice low and sharp. You told me this was clean, she said. You said she had nothing. Derek stared straight ahead, watching the court clerk highlight language in the settlement agreement language he had chosen. Specifically language that was now glowing under scrutiny like a lit fuse. Jade looked across the aisle at Claire then. Her eyes narrowed. You planned this, she said under her breath. Not loudly. Almost to herself. Claire looked at her, not coldly, not with triumph. Something closer to sorrow, the specific kind that comes from recognizing someone who didn't have to be here but chose to be. No, Claire said quietly. I prepared for it. That distinction landed harder than any accusation could. The judge cleared his throat. Miss Mercer. He consulted the supplementary materials. You are identified in several internal communications related to the transactions in question. Were you aware of their content? Jade's face went very still. She glanced at Derek. He didn't look back. I handle brand communication, she said carefully, not financial structuring. Your email address appears in multiple coordination threads connected to the messaging strategy around these decisions, the judge said, his tone precise and even. The room shifted again, and Jade understood in the specific, sickening way that understanding arrives too late that she hadn't just supported Derek's narrative. She had built it, polished it, distributed it, and now it was attached to something far more serious than a social reputation. Ethan finally turned to look at her. There was no reassurance in his expression, only calculation, only the rapid arithmetic of a man deciding what he still needed and what had become a liability. That was the moment Jade understood what she had actually been. Not a partner. Not a collaborator. A shield. Across the room, Claire remained still. She didn't push. She didn't need to. The momentum had moved beyond her hands now. Truth, once it's on record, has its own gravity. Its own direction. The judge steepled his fingers. The court will be referring several of these matters for further review. This proceeding has exceeded its original scope. He set a new hearing date. Court is in recess. Derek sat for a moment after the gavel fell, unable to move. The room was rearranging itself around him, people gathering papers, stepping away, calculating their own distance from what had just been revealed. The story he had shaped so carefully was no longer his to tell. Because from this point forward, the court wasn't listening to assumptions, it was listening to facts. And facts don't negotiate. The fallout didn't wait for the next court date. Derek's phone was vibrating before he'd made it through the courthouse doors. He ignored the first 2 calls, lifting his chin as a few phones appeared at a distance. He told himself this was temporary, a misreading, something his attorneys would smooth over the way they always had. But control doesn't vanish all at once. It fractures starting at the edges, moving toward the center, and by the time you notice the pattern, the structure is already compromised. The first call he answered was from his CFO. 2 investors called for an emergency briefing, the man said. His voice was tight, professionally alarmed. They've seen the court filing notice. Derek's grip tightened around the phone. Tell them it's routine. A pause. They're not treating it as routine. In the black sedan waiting at the curb, Derek finally scrolled through his messages. Missed calls. Emails flagged urgent. A calendar appointment deleted without explanation. One message stood apart, a short note from a board member who had never canceled anything before. We need distance until this resolves. 6 words. 14 characters of consequence. Jade slid into the seat beside him, quiet now. Her earlier confidence had been replaced by something brittle and inward. She scrolled her own phone color, leaving her face in stages. They're asking about me, she said. Reporters, analysts. Why my name is in those communications. Derek said nothing. By that evening, the shift had texture. A development partner postponed a signing. A lender requested revised terms on a project that had been considered settled. A deal that had taken 8 months to assemble was suddenly under review. No accusations yet. No headlines, just hesitation. Hesitation was enough. Hesitation was the sound of people quietly protecting themselves. Derek sat alone in his office long after midnight, the Austin skyline flickering through the glass. The staff had gone. The phones were quiet, and in that silence, he understood something he had never had to understand before. This was how collapse actually started. Not with scandal, not with headlines, with silence, with the specific silence of people stepping back, creating distance, protecting themselves from proximity to the thing they'd previously been happy to benefit from. Across the city, Claire cooked dinner. She helped Lily with a map project for school. She listened to her daughter describe a disagreement on the playground with the patience of someone who had learned that most important things required it. The world Derek had built was unraveling. Claire didn't celebrate it. Because this wasn't revenge. It was consequence, specific, proportional, and entirely his own doing. Every call he wasn't getting, every door quietly closing, traced directly back to decisions he had made in rooms where he believed no one was watching, when he assumed that silence meant safety, when he signed his name to a story that depended on Claire never speaking. Late that night, Derek sat back in his chair, genuinely exhausted, genuinely alone, and arrived at the truth he had been avoiding for months. Claire hadn't destroyed him. She had simply stopped protecting him from himself. Sophie didn't know anything about court proceedings or financial guarantors or documents with language designed to disappear. Note, her name is Lily in this version. Lily only knew that her mother's shoulders felt different that afternoon. They were sitting on a bench near the school playground, the late sun pulling long shadows across the worn concrete. Lily kicked her feet slowly, watching the other kids chase each other, then turned to look at Claire with the seriousness that arrived without warning. Mom. Are you still sad about Daddy? Claire paused. She'd learned not to rush her answers with Lily. Truth mattered, but so did its shape, especially for a 7-year-old who was still building her understanding of how people worked. "I'm not sad the way I used to be," she said. "I'm clearer now." Lily frowned at that, working it over. "Is Daddy mad at you?" "Daddy is dealing with the choices he made," Claire said simply. Lily nodded slowly, carefully, and then said the one thing Claire hadn't prepared for. "He used to tell me that secrets were wrong if they hurt people," Lily said. "But he also told me not to say anything when he yelled at you." The air between them shifted. Claire turned fully toward her daughter. Heart tight, not with grief but with recognition. The specific kind that comes from finally being truly seen by the last person you expected. "How did that feel?" Claire asked. Lily shrugged her small shoulders. "Confusing. Because you were being quiet. But you weren't doing anything wrong." Claire felt the tears come. Not grief. Not anger. Release, the long, slow kind that takes years to arrive. "That's very perceptive," she said softly. "And you're right." She pulled Lily close and held on. Later that week, Lily's words traveled further than Claire had intended. At a routine counseling check-in, one Claire had scheduled months earlier before any of this had come to a head, Lily repeated what she'd said on the bench, simply, without drama, with the flat honesty that children carry because they haven't yet learned to protect adults from the truth. The counselor listened, asked gentle questions, updated her notes. No alarm, no accusation, but the record was accurate now. When Derek was later asked in a completely separate context in a room full of people who knew nothing about the courthouse or the documents to speak to certain patterns of behavior he had always categorized as private matters, he found himself without the easy answers he'd relied on for years. Because a child hadn't accused him, she had simply remembered him. Clearly and without revision, Claire had never pushed Lily toward it. Never asked her to speak. Never coached a single word. She hadn't needed to. One truth spoken once by an honest voice settled exactly where it belonged. That night, Claire tucked Lily in and kissed her forehead. "You didn't do anything wrong," she whispered. Lily smiled, half asleep. "I know." Claire turned off the light and stood for a moment in the hallway, listening to the quiet apartment. Strength didn't always announce itself. Truth didn't need repetition. Sometimes all it took was one honest voice, and the story could never be rewritten again. If this story is reaching you right now, I want you to stay with me. The most important turn is still coming. The offer arrived quietly. No press, no announcement. Just a sealed envelope slid under Claire's door one afternoon while Lily was at school. She recognized the handwriting, clean, precise, written with the kind of deliberate care that was its own signal. She didn't open it immediately. She made coffee, stood at the window, watched South Congress move below her the way it always had, indifferent to individual victories and losses, indifferent to the specific weight of this moment. This wasn't about speed, it was about clarity. When she finally opened it, the contents were exactly what she'd expected. A revised settlement proposal, not from Derek directly but through his legal team. Asset restitution. Financial restoration. Protective clauses acknowledging in careful language exactly what the court process had already made unavoidable. Derek was trying to contain the damage before it spread further. Marcus called within minutes. "If you accept," he said, "the escalation ends here. If you don't, the next phase will be thorough." He didn't need to explain. Audits, financial reviews, a process that would not stop until there was nothing left unexamined. Claire set the papers down. That evening, she walked with Lily through Zilker Park, the leaves dry and gold, the air finally cool enough to be pleasant. Lily talked about a drawing she was working on for school, an imaginary city with towers that had gardens on top. Claire listened, grounded herself in her daughter's voice, let it carry her away from the documents for a while. Later, after Lily fell asleep, she made her decision. She didn't accept everything. She accepted the $1.8 million in funds that had been improperly shifted, documented, and obscured during the marriage. She accepted the legal protections ensuring Lily's financial future couldn't be touched by Derek's business decisions. She accepted the formal acknowledgement on record irremovable that specific actions had carried specific consequences. She declined anything that felt like conquest. Marcus was quiet on the phone when she told him. "You're certain?" he said. "Yes," Claire said. "I don't need to erase him. I just need to step out from under him." The following morning, the response was filed. Derek's legal team was not prepared for what Claire refused. No extended litigation. No additional exposure beyond what had already occurred. No public spectacle. For Derek, that was the most disorienting part, because Claire's restraint made something undeniable. This had never been about revenge. She hadn't needed him ruined to feel restored. She had needed freedom, and she had claimed it without becoming what he expected her to be. As Claire closed her laptop that night, something settled over her that she hadn't felt in years. Not relief, exactly. Not triumph. Something quieter than both. Authorship. Her life was hers to write again. And from this point forward, every chapter would be chosen, not survived. Life didn't transform with a headline. There was no announcement, no dramatic pivot, just a quietness that settled over Claire's apartment on South Congress and deepened week by week into something that felt permanent. Mornings were for school drop-offs and coffee brewed in the old drip machine Lily had painted flowers on. Evenings were for homework, shared dinners, the slow accumulation of routines that felt chosen rather than defaulted into. Claire worked from home now, consulting selectively, taking on cases that aligned with what she believed rather than what looked ambitious. Her laptop closed at dinner time. Her phone stayed face down more often than not. Peace, she had learned, was not something that arrived. It was something you built deliberately, every day. Owen Press remained present. Not intrusive, not pressing. He called when he wanted to, not to check in, not to manage. They talked about ordinary things, a book he thought Lily might like, a hiking trail outside Austin that Claire hadn't tried yet. Conversations without pressure, without subtext. That was what disarmed her. One Saturday, Owen invited them to Lake Travis. Nothing formal, just walking the waterfront, the city skyline, faint and distant in the late afternoon light. Lily ran ahead, chasing something along the water's edge, her laughter carrying back in pieces. Claire stood at the railing above the water. Owen stopped beside her. "I never wanted to enter your life as a solution," he said, quietly looking out at the lake. "You never needed one." Claire turned toward him, listening. "I chose to stand beside you because of how you moved through all of this," he said. Not the strategy, not the restraint, though both were remarkable. The way you refused to let pain turn you into someone unrecognizable. Claire felt something loosen in her chest. Owen reached into his jacket pocket, unhurried, unperformative, and held out a small ring. Simple, elegant, the kind of thing chosen for meaning, not display. "I'm not asking you to start over," he said. "I'm asking if you'd like to build forward. At your pace, on your terms." Claire didn't answer immediately. She thought about the woman she used to be, the one who kept quiet to keep the peace, the one who mistook endurance for love, the one who had learned to read between clauses long before she understood she would need to read between the lines of her own life. She thought about Lily running along the water. "Mom," Lily's voice arrived, breathless, eyes wide. "Did I miss something?" Claire laughed, the kind that came up from somewhere deep. She pulled her daughter close. "No," she said. "You're right on time." She looked back at Owen. Something settled, not fireworks, not urgency, just alignment, the specific clarity that arrives when a decision is correct. "Yes," Claire said. Owen smiled, not with triumph, with relief. The lake moved on around them, wide and indifferent. But for Claire, something had quietly completed its arc. She hadn't been rescued. She hadn't been rewarded. She had been met, seen fully, chosen freely without conditions. And after everything she had endured, that felt like the most extraordinary thing of all. Her life didn't require a transformation montage. It simply softened in ways that only those living inside it could feel. Lily hummed while she made breakfast. Claire's consulting practice grew slowly and selectively. Cases she believed in, contracts she understood from both sides. She took Sundays off without guilt. She went back to the community center on occasional Tuesdays just because she wanted to. Derek faded from her world gradually. A chapter, not a defining one. The consequences he faced followed their own course quietly and without her involvement. A company recalibration, relationships that stopped returning calls, a reputation reshaped by its own decisions. Claire didn't monitor any of it. She was done organizing herself around his story. Owen didn't rush anything. They talked about schools, about whether Austin would hold them or whether somewhere with more space might be better. About what kind of home felt right for the three of them, not impressive, just real. Lily adjusted naturally, the way children do when they sense safety without needing it named. She laughed more, slept more soundly, asked fewer worried questions. One afternoon, walking through Barton Creek Greenbelt, Lily reached for Claire's hand and said, "You smile different now." Claire knelt down. How Lily thought about it, serious in that particular way. Like you're not waiting for something bad to happen. Claire held her daughter tight, eyes closed. That was it. That was the exact shape of what had changed. She wasn't waiting for approval. She wasn't waiting for an apology that would never come. She wasn't proving anything to anyone, not to Derek, not to the people who had believed his version of her, not even to herself. The quiet strength she had built had nothing left to stand against. Months later, on a small terrace overlooking the lake at sunset, Claire married Owen. No spectacle. No audience beyond the handful of people who had earned the right to be there. Lily walked between them, holding a hand on each side, grinning with the pride of someone who had helped make something good happen without quite knowing how. Claire didn't feel like she had won. She felt like she had arrived. At night, when the Austin lights blurred softly beyond the bedroom window, she sometimes sat with the quiet and let herself think about the woman she used to be. The one who mistook endurance for destiny, who confused silence with strength, who believed that keeping the peace was the same as living peacefully. She didn't regret her past. It had taught her to read carefully people, language, the space between what someone said and what they meant. It had taught her that silence chosen deliberately could be a form of power. But voice claimed fully at the right moment without apology, that was freedom. Her life wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And for Claire Hartwell, that was everything. Because the greatest justice was never watching someone else fall. It was standing fully in a life you chose, unafraid, unburdened, and finally completely at peace. If you're still here with me, if something in this story found you where you needed it, then I want to step out of the narrator's chair for just a moment. Not to tell you what to feel, just to sit beside you and acknowledge what we both know. Claire's story isn't really about a divorce or documents or a private jet landing at the right moment. It's about the specific courage required to stay quiet when the world expects you to react, and to speak when the world assumes you've accepted defeat. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we have power over our minds, not over events. The moment we understand that distinction, we stop giving our peace away to people who were never trustworthy with it. Claire didn't win by destroying Derek. She won by refusing to become someone who needed to. If any part of this resonated, if it reminded you of a silence you've carried, a strength you haven't yet named, a chapter of your own that you're still inside, then you're not alone in it. Stories like this exist to show us that calm can be the most powerful thing in the room, and that choosing yourself is not the same as abandoning anyone else. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment below. Tell me what part of Claire's journey hit closest. Your words help more people find these stories. The themes in this story are grounded in real human experiences, the long patience of healing, the weight of being misread, the specific dignity of choosing accountability over revenge. But the characters, events, and circumstances are entirely fictional, created for reflection and emotional resonance, not to represent any real individuals or situations. Our goal is always to offer stories that carry emotional truth, not news, not legal advice, not real cases. If something in this story felt familiar, that familiarity comes from shared human experience, not from any factual claims. Thank you for watching with an open heart, for choosing stories that take the long way around through difficulty and back out into light. We'll be here for the next one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment.